Before we really dive into review Solo, a Star Wars story, I first want to address the fact that this is not yet another clickbait apocalyptic Disney has ruined Star Wars hot piss take where the oh-so-oppressed white male unironically yell about how they're being discriminated against by the evil social justice warriors, which these days has been all the rage on the internet ever since The Last Jedi came out.
They will always find something to complain about.
The way that these chuckle fucks have been pissing and moaning, you'd think that they were fucking Rosa Parks or Marsha P. Johnson, but in reality they have more in common with Randy Quaid. What I'm trying to get at here is that if the biggest problem in your life is that you didn't like how Disney is handling Star Wars, and not say, well, everything else that is happening in this damn country, then your life must be pretty damn good.
Will always find something to complain about.
Oh, and additionally, it's not like the Star Wars franchise wasn't in creative dire straits before Disney got their money-grubbing mitts on the franchise with the whole re-edits in the 90s, the horrible prequels, and do I even dare fucking mention Connect Star Wars?
I'm picking up my blaster, putting it on my sign. I'm jumping in my Falcon, whoopie at my side. I'm solo, I'm Han Solo, I'm Han Solo, I'm Han Solo, solo.
So with that out of the way, we can finally discuss Solo, a Star Wars story, a movie that is on the whole unnecessary, but is still pretty damn enjoyable. Sure, I do have many criticisms with the film, and oh, we will get to them, but overall, I did have fun, and it's hard to argue against fun. Especially when it's regarding the franchise I'm most nostalgic about, as well as being a film centered around my favorite Star Wars character. Well, other than Salacious Crumb, of course. The story of Solo, a Star Wars story, is a Star Wars story about Han Solo, a Star Wars story. The plot follows Han Solo, a young pilot looking for adventure. During his travels, he embarks on a mission involving his mentor, Beckett, his new friend Chewbacca, Lando Calrissian, the robot L3, and his reunited childhood sweetheart Qi'ra, so that they can all pay off a debt to a sexually abusive big-time criminal. Not too different from Return of the Jedi's Harvey the Weinstein. The best aspect of this movie is the characters and their respective performances. In fact, they basically elevate what would be a ho-hum average movie, because everything else across the board is only competently done. Like, the action is fun, what you'd expect, the visuals are interesting and cool, the callbacks are funny and hit you in the feels, and the story of how Han Solo becomes this legendary smuggler is told pretty decently, with the caveat that the first act of the movie is very roughly edited. And yet, despite this, the actors bring their A-game to this movie, and they elevate the material into being a really good movie. Actor Alden Ehrenreich, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, does more than just look the part. He portrays Han Solo's cocky swagger personally to the point that I feel like I'm watching a young Han Solo in action. Woody Harrelson as Beckett is good as always, bringing some passion to a project that many other people will be phoning in an easy paycheck for. Emilia Clarke as Qi'ra is actually quite a revelation. Like, I know that she's good in that minor small role in that minuscule show called Game of Thrones. But god damn, I didn't know she had this more personal and relatable talent within her, in order for her to portray a complicated romantic interest who can take care of herself in a fight, which perfectly complements Ehrenreich in the lead. However, it's Donald Glover as Lando who absolutely steals the show. His performance highlights the eccentricities in the Calrissian from Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and his line delivery is pure cinematic gold. Additionally, he's portrayed with a flirtatious hunter on the prowl, if you know what I mean, aspect, which makes sense considering that the screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan revealed that the character is pansexual, or in other words, someone who is open to being sexually involved with people regardless of their sexual or gender identities. This reveal unfortunately leads into an issue that I have with the film, and also many other movies coming out of Hollywood in general. My criticism is in how the film industry claims that they are supportive of LGBTQ inclusivity in their films, but never seem to fully fucking commit to it. What I'm referencing here is that Lando being pansexual was only ever discussed in an interview between Lawrence Kasdan and the Huffington Post. It's an aspect of Lando's character that is never discussed, displayed, or openly referred to in the film. Sure, admittedly, he does technically have a relationship with the droid L3, but this doesn't mean that it's a confirmation of any form of LGBTQ identity. It doesn't confirm that he's pansexual, bisexual, or homosexual, only that he's robosexual. And unfortunately, Lando now joins a pretty lengthy list of LGBTQ characters whose identity identities are only acknowledged and revealed off-screen, which is unfortunate because clearly Hollywood can't write us out of the closet. Some people believe the lack of representation of LGBTQ people on screen has something to do with how the Chinese and the Russian governments would ban the films from their respective countries. But I say that this is bullshit, because if there is a cut of Iron Man 3 that is basically pro-Chinese propaganda and the cinematic equivalent of Disney giving Chinese audiences fellatio, then Solo: A Star Wars Story can have a cut where Lando is allowed to be openly and proudly pansexual. Stop the culture of shame, Disney. Release the gay American cut. Another issue I have with Solo: A Star Wars Story is that it doesn't really go too deep into any sort of narrative theme. Like, while the movie is technically about Han Solo's formative years, there isn't really a big picture here beyond the movie embracing the fact it's a fun swashbuckling tale set in the Star Wars universe. Which is fine, but this lack of fully committing to any form of meaningful thematic element unfortunately permeates through other aspects of the plot, and also causes the movie to often contradict itself narratively. For example, there are plot points in the film that could make the film be about identity, such as Lando's aforementioned pansexuality and how L3, who is a droid liberationist, and the first instance where Star Wars acknowledges the criticism of how droids are created to perform slave labor. But apart from some humorous one-liners, some visual gags, and a really good action sequence, this idea of Lando's pansexuality or droids having a human-like identity doesn't go anywhere and is ignored in the back half of the film, and eventually, due to spoilers, contradicts itself worse than my country's current foreign policy. Additionally, this problem impacts some of the film's best parts, such as like how Han Solo and Chewbacca meet each other, which is just glorious. And some of my favorite parts of the film are about the budding bromantic relationship between the two, but unfortunately that's not what the movie is about because it doesn't spend enough time on it. Because on the other hand, there's another contradicting plot element with Beckett, who wants to teach Solo in his own nihilistic worldview. So if it's not about identity or developing friendships or learning who to trust, then what the hell is the movie even about, really? And the answer to that is, unfortunately, I don't really think there is a big picture to this movie. I mean, there are lots of thematic elements, but none are explored in the same way that Lando would probably like to probe Han Solo's rectum. I have to wonder if the lack of thematic cohesion and narrative depth has more to do with Solo: A Star Wars Story's incredibly troubled production, and by troubled I don't mean like someone obsessed with autoerotic asphyxiation, but I mean the fact that during production the original directors Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who are best known for the Lego Movie and the Jump Street movies, were fired due to creative differences, and a more conventional director in Ron Howard replaced them. This may have had an unfortunate effect on the narrative, and it would explain why the themes are so muddled and contrast with each other, because if there were too many cooks. But if that's the case, then I'm shocked that Solo: A Star Wars Story turned out as well as it did. My final thoughts on the film are basically it's a good time in the theater, it's a fun Star Wars movie, the character work and the acting are terrific and really what elevate the material and allow you to mostly ignore the lack of any meaningful thematic undertones. I recommend it. May the Force be with you.
Hold on.